So, Tom, a warm welcome back to the OSJ conference series. You made the point in your opening remarks that the OSV industry still trails the pack when it comes to profitability.
Well, I mean, the OSV sector at large is still struggling with oversupply and weakened demand. So I would say it's in a similar situation to other offshore marine markets like the rig sector. But when we move up the value chain towards more service-orientated contractors in the subsea EPCI side of things, then we are seeing a more significant pickup in performance. So being able to differentiate for increased levels of engineering is certainly a way to differentiate in the current market, and unfortunately we've seen an increased level of commoditization in offshore support.
You made the point that fleet rationalization is the main weapon for recovery. Some 1,800 OSVs currently in layup.
No, absolutely. So most OSV companies have seen their value diminish significantly since 2014 as a function of less work at lower prices. Obviously, the reaction here is to lay up vessels to reduce operating costs. And as you say, there are around 1,800 vessels currently in layup. What to do with these vessels, obviously, is the next big thing, because while these vessels reduce the OPEX base for these contractors, they still exist. And the customer group know they still exist, and they still put downward pressure on pricing. So as long as they remain in the market to some extent, we won't see a significant rally in prices, in our opinion. So layup is good, but it's the next step. It's scrapping that will really drive a recovery.
Just drilling down a little bit further on that, you made the point that 45% of those vessels that are laid up are less than 15 years old, which of course means that 55% are over 15 years old.
Absolutely, and it would be a lot easier if all of these laid up vessels were old. If we could say that they're all 35 years old, falling apart, it would be a much easier story when it comes to scrapping. But the reality is a substantial proportion of the vessels in layup or in deep freeze, these are young vessels. These are vessels which are still on balance sheets. So one of the big obstacles to scrapping at the moment is looking for companies who have the balance sheet strength to suddenly wipe these assets away. Until someone is brave enough to do this, or people start to build balance sheet strength, we're unlikely to see much momentum here. But then it creates a chicken and egg situation that without the scrapping, how will people build that balance sheet strength?
We will talk a little bit more about balance sheet strength, but just staying on scrapping, a very interesting stat was that if we scrap everything, we'll get 70 to 80% utilization, which brings us back to sort of 2007.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe that's a bit of a carrot on the stick, a bit of a pipe dream. I mean, if we were to scrap everything that is over 15 years of age, which is maybe a bit more realistic, we would probably return to a 2012, 2014 level of overall utilization. The industry still was dealing with oversupply during that period, remember, although things were much better. But yes, if we were to scrap everything that's currently in layup, we would return to those heady 2006 to 2008 days, which would certainly be a big incentive for people.
You referenced a couple of pockets globally where we might actually see some reactivation. One of them was Gulf of Mexico, and another one was staying in that region, Mexico and Guyana.
So reactivation doesn't necessarily mean that the market is getting significantly better. There are still massive layups. But what we've seen is a lot of people wanted to lay up some of their smaller vessels and keep their more expensive vessels working, even though those vessels were working at lower rates. But the strategy has somewhat changed, and that now we see contractors preferring to lay up some of the bigger vessels and actually bring in the smaller vessels because they can actually potentially make more money. The operators have moved from wanting the best boats at the lowest rates to just wanting the lowest rates.
So we've talked about the global scene a little bit there, but one of the points you made is that to succeed, you need to take a country-specific focus and not a regionally generic one. How does that apply to where we're currently sitting now in Southeast Asia?
So many businesses, particularly international non-Asian businesses, have treated Asia-Pacific as one area. They've had a regional hub in Singapore, they've had open registry vessels, and they've attempted to penetrate these large demand centers in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. But what we've seen over the last 5 years is a very acute sharpening of local content policy. Indonesia, Malaysia more recently, and now Thailand. Once this happens, the ability to actually run a Southeast Asian business from Singapore will be significantly diminished.
And you made the point that the market has structurally changed to a point where we're in a new normal and that you're spending a lot of time working with banks on refinancing. and that the key is to have an asset base fit for purpose rather than being multi-useless. What did you mean by that?
It's important to remember that external factors will not help contractors out of the current situation. That salvation will need to come from within. There had been a trend of overbuilding in the previous cycle, where people have tried to have a vessel that fits all the potential needs of a customer. So the biggest crane, DP2, DP3, all these additional features that add cost but weren't mission critical. What the focus will be on now is making sure that asset base is fit for purpose, to have more of an identity. What do these vessels actually do? Who are our customers and what do they need? And do we have the right asset base to do this in a cost-effective manner? The market has changed. Pricing growth would be a nice to have, but it's certainly something that can't be banked on. The way to generate cash in the current environment is through increased utilization and managing your operating costs. So investigating supply chain costs and what can be done there, and also conversations with customers to ensure utilization. Those are the two key facets.
Where's the good news in the Asia Pacific region?
Well, as I mentioned in the presentation, we have seen a sustained uptick in offshore drilling, and surprising to some, that uptick has been led by Southeast Asia. We have seen bright spots in Myanmar, for example. Now, it's not to say that the Myanmar market and the growth that's expected there through very successful exploration campaigns is going to be enough to absorb all of the overhang. But for companies that have the right value proposition and that have a first mover position in Myanmar, certainly we can see some uptick and some good news.
We spoke towards the end of our discussion about the potential for new business models, and you made reference to an Avis or Uber style concept.
So absolutely, this is something that's been mooted by a lot of people, and it makes intuitive sense in that you have a massive pool of vessels in deep freeze, a massive lot of vessels, and you have quite a substantial volume of demand. Now, demand has fallen overall around 20% for all asset classes globally. There's still a huge amount of work. If you could have an asset-light model where utilization isn't a risk for your business because you're able to win the work and then pick vessels that are needed to do the work, it sounds compelling. However, we have a massive lack of standardization, getting boats qualified. So a vessel that may be able to work in one country market may not be qualified to work in another country market. It may not be qualified to work with one E&P customer. It may be qualified to work with one E&P customer, but not someone else or not their next door neighbor. So this level of standardization is a massive barrier to what could be an intriguing concept.
Thom Payne, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.